You're listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis, the only podcast focused on the biohealth capital region. Each episode, we'll talk to leaders in the industry to break down the biggest topics happening today in biohealth.
Hi, this is Rich Bendis. I'm your host for BioTalk and also the founder and CEO of BioHealth Innovation, located in Rockville, Maryland, in the biohealth capital region. And we have a guest that we've known for several years on BioTalk today. Her name is Sona Shah. She's the CEO and co-founder of Neopenda, which was one of our early accelerators that we had in the biohealth capital region. Sona's going to give us an update of what's happened over the last decade with Neopenda. Sona, welcome to BioTalk.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and to be connected still after a decade of knowing you.
Nice thing is you survived over the last decade. We're going to talk about your survival and how you've done it and the progress you've made with the company and the technology, Sona. So before we get into the company and the technology, though, I think the listeners would like to know more about you. So please give us a little intro to your background, how you evolved to where you are today.
Circuitous, but I can start with my engineering background. So I went to Georgia Tech for undergrad and I studied chemical engineering, graduated a semester early, and decided I wanted to use that extra semester traveling and doing something totally different. So I went to Western Kenya and I was a primary school teacher in a really remote community. By remote, I mean there was no running water or power. So it was a totally different life than what I had grown up with. But I was there for several months and just absolutely loved everything about it, except for a number of inequities that I was just fortunate not to have growing up. So that stuck with me, but I came back to the US and had a job lined up in pharma. So entered a totally different world once again and started working in bioprocess research and development. I loved my time there as well. I really loved the engineering. All the medications that we were creating were going through clinical trials, so got to see a wide variety of different things. Loved the process product development and just really introducing myself into the world of healthcare. But I kept thinking at some point that the kids that I taught in Kenya may never see the medications that I was helping make. And that inequity is what drove me back to graduate school to figure out how can we provide equitable access to healthcare around the world. I didn't go in with the mentality of having a startup. I went in thinking, I don't really know what I want to do. So I picked Columbia University because they had a lab that was creating an HIV and syphilis diagnostic. I wanted to do my master's in biomedical engineering and get more in the device side. But I also worked at the TB Alliance as an intern in community engagement and drug discovery. So just kind of engaging myself in the nonprofit sector, in lab work, research. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. But then I took a biodesign course with my now co-founder, Tess, and we started exploring why neonatal mortality in particular is so much higher in low and middle income countries than here in the US. And there truly are about 1 million problems that contribute to that. But we realized that none could be solved from a lab in New York. So we got funding from the university, went out to Uganda, and we did a needs assessment out there. And that's when we were just astonished that the hospitals were overwhelmed with the number of patients and just not enough nurses, not enough staff to help care for these patients. And the only medical equipment we saw was actually collecting dust in the corner of a room, or what nurses called the equipment graveyard. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a room or a yard full of broken medical equipment because devices are not designed for 85% of the world's population. They're designed for the 15% of the world that doesn't have to worry about power instability or dust getting into our equipment. So that's why we created Neopenda, to design med tech that functions anywhere in the world, with an initial focus on helping clinicians identify when patients are in distress so that they can provide more timely and appropriate treatment. So that was 10 years ago, and we're really honored to still be around.
Basically, you mentioned in an article which we are published last week about the Neopenda story that while you were teaching in rural Kenya, it was really the turning point that inspired it. Talk a little bit about why you're so concerned about global health and the inconsistency in the ability to deliver quality care globally around the world.
It was certainly a pivotal moment in my life. I was really fortunate to grow up in a loving family with all the resources that we needed. And I think that The travel experiences that I've had throughout my life have certainly informed this, but actually living in a community and experiencing the day-to-day of a different community exposed me to what most of the world looks like. And it's this really beautiful, incredible culture, a life without expectations. When I was there, running water was a luxury. Here at home, if I don't have hot water for a day, I'm struggling. So it's a nice reminder that all the things that we live with here are sometimes unnecessary and they're not essential for our life. And I think that was really grounding and humbling for me. I went into this experience as perhaps a naive American thinking, I can change the world and I'm going to do all of these things. And I walk out of that experience thinking, I don't actually know that I did anything, but what it did do was really change my mindset. It changed my outlook on making sure that everybody has equitable access to not just healthcare, but fundamental rights: the right to survive and thrive, the right to have housing, and the right to adequate food and nutrition. During this time in Kenya, I think the exposure was not specifically just in the global health, although there were many instances there, but I think it was just a number of inequities that fundamentally I knew about them growing up, but I didn't actually have that exposure. And that's really what turned for me. I'll just share one brief story. I volunteered with a friend who I met during the experience, and he was feeling really sick. So he went to the hospital. They diagnosed him with malaria. So they gave him medication. A week later, he's feeling worse than he did a week before. And so he's going back to the hospital multiple times, getting the strongest medications to treat malaria. Finally, he decided to take the 8-hour bus ride to Nairobi, where they did a blood test and realized that he's actually never had malaria. It was probably just food poisoning, and he was misdiagnosed. He had the opportunity to go to Nairobi, which is 8 hours away by bus. Not everyone has that opportunity. And so that was one instance that showed me that healthcare may only be accessible to the people who have the means for it. And that just seemed wrong to me. It seems like we should live in a world where healthcare is accessible to everyone.
With all of the inequities and all of the challenges you saw, how did you decide on your first product, neoGuard, as the first way that you were going to enter into this world and basically talk about some of the challenges in trying to develop a technology or a medical device or a new product that was geared towards the underserved market?
Honestly, walking into a lot of these neonatal wards, there are so many problems that even today, I get the overwhelming feeling of how can one company, one product really make an impacting change? And that's still an overwhelming feeling, but you have to start somewhere and you have to start working with partners to really enable the scale and the ability to go somewhere. So when we walk into these facilities, I'm talking about, in some cases, 150 patients and 2 nurses. One of the things that we experienced in many different facilities that we had gone to early on was that in these situations, the nurses are frantically going from one patient to the next, trying to figure out who actually needs their attention. And of course, they're very clinically trained. They have all of the knowledge that they need to treat these patients, but it's impossible to care for that many patients at once. So what we sought out to do was, how do we help empower these clinicians to know which patients need their attention? And what's a better way than giving voice to newborns who don't yet have their voice beyond their cries or other clinical signs? So vital signs really give that voice to our newborns. So we continuously monitor pulse rate, respiratory rate, oxygen saturation, and temperature. And any deviations from abnormal vital signs are really how we can detect that something may be wrong with the patient. We give those alerts directly to the nurses, and they then can go to the patients that need them most and direct their attention to how they can save a patient's life. Some of the challenges relate to just really defining what the user needs and requirements are. I think it sounds intuitive, but it's not commonly done in practice. Start with the problem. Don't start with the solution. So a lot of people develop technologies that are really cool and then figure out what problem they want to solve afterwards. But it doesn't work that way. You have to really understand what problem is happening on the ground. And I think those are fundamental principles that we learned in our biodesign course. And so we probably spent the first 2 years of Neopenda's life just figuring out what is our problem statement. In many cases, we spent time as nurses in these wards, just being fly on the wall, in some cases transitioning into a nurse, which I'm certainly not qualified to do, but just really trying to immerse ourselves into what the nurses are experiencing day in and day out. And that really informed what became neoGuard, our continuous vital signs monitor. I think in some cases, being that fly on the wall, I stopped hearing alarms, for example. So alarm fatigue is a massive issue all over the world. That helped us make sure that we have 3 different alert systems in our product. So a lot of the challenges were addressed from being involved and immersed in the communities that we're engaging in. But creating medtech for these environments does come with constraints around affordability. We were seeking to create a product that's a tenth of the cost of existing multi-parameter patient monitors. How can we be sustainable? How can we be a for-profit entity that grows while creating a product that is just so much lower cost? We looked at power. There isn't continuous power in most of our facilities. There's blackouts, brownouts all the time. So how do we design for the most rural infrastructures where there isn't an infrastructure? That's really where products like ours are needed. So there were power instability, dust, water ingress, or liquid ingress. All of those were considerations, all while we were thinking about how do we create a product that does not compromise on safety, quality, and efficacy, even though we're designing with affordability in mind. There's many, many different challenges on the design side that we looked at, but I think that's what makes us so unique is that I could probably count on one hand the number of companies that have started medtech for emerging markets, more specifically sub-Saharan Africa. We're all good friends. So I think a different structure than most people think about. The other side of it is the business model side. You can't just create a product that we donate because no matter how well designed it is, if you donate that equipment, it will likely end up in that graveyard. Having that sense of ownership was a really important piece that we were designing. So not just affordability, but there has to be willingness and ability to pay for that. There has to be bottom-up demand from the facilities that have limited resources to pay for a product that is truly needed there. So there's a lot of innovation that went into the business model side, which we can also talk a little bit about later. And then one other big challenge that I'll talk about is on the funding side. Funding has been a journey, and I'm sure that's the case for most startups, but medical devices are highly regulated. It's hardware involved, and we're working in emerging markets. So it's almost the trifecta of everything that an investor doesn't want to invest in because it's hard and it truly is challenging. But that's why we created, that's why we needed to create a company like this, because medtech doesn't exist in our environments. I'm not afraid of a challenge. I'm not afraid of something being hard. That's the whole reason we exist. By definition, we are doing something different. We've secured about $6 million in funding since we started the company. About half of that has been through non-dilutive capital. Half of that has been through dilutive capital. So it's been a whole journey of how we've raised our funds, but I will say it has been a challenge. There has to be a lot more education with our audiences around why this is an investable opportunity, why we're not a nonprofit, why are we focusing on neonatal patients as our first patient population. So there's a whole host of things that are involved in creating medtech for emerging markets.
Thank you. You've actually gone a little bit ahead on some of this. Well, we're talking to Sona Shah, who is basically the CEO and the co-founder of Neopenda and has created neoGuard, which monitors vital signs in the neonatal world. But since this is a audio podcast and people can't see anything, Sona, you've talked about monitoring vital signs, but people don't understand how they're captured. Can you describe what the product looks like that captures the vital signs and gives the feedback back to the nurse?
Our product is a wearable device, and that's one of the key design features as well, is that it's not your big, bulky patient monitors because there isn't space for those monitors in our wards. The wearable device is worn on a patient's forehead, and there are 2 sensors on the back of the device. It almost looks like a watch on your head. We designed specifically for the forehead for neonates because it's accessible, it's easy. This was informed by our nurses who are using the product itself. You can wipe it down with commonly available cleaning agents, so it's entirely reusable. There are no consumables involved in that product. The wearable then wirelessly connects over Bluetooth Low Energy to a centralized dashboard on a tablet we provide with the system. So clinicians just have to look at one screen and they can tell what's going on with all their patients. We trend all the data over time that relays more information for clinical guidance of what's actually happening with the patients. So the devices themselves are extremely tiny. We've designed them for preterm newborns. it does make it easy for us to scale up to other patient populations as well. But think a small watch that's worn on a baby's forehead and then transmits vitals over to one centralized tablet.
That's much more descriptive so that people understand now what it looks like. They can see that on your website, which we'll tell them how to get to later. But early in the beginnings of Neopenda, and you being an early entrepreneur without a lot of experience, having done this before, you had the opportunity to be selected to participate in the Relevant Health Accelerator in Rockville, Maryland, early in the startup of the company. Talk a little bit about what that acceleration experience did for you, what you learned through the process, and how did it shape the future direction that Neopenda has gone?
Yeah, I don't think we'd be here without that accelerator program. Tess and I were both engineers that went into this biodesign course with no concept really of what is a business model. What does it actually take to go from idea all the way through commercial launch? And so I think an accelerator program, specifically Relevant Health, was exactly what we needed when we needed it. We were doing this as we were finishing up grad school. So that was a fun commute between Rockville, Maryland and New York. But I think at that time, our passion certainly lied with Neopenda. And so we were really honored to be part of the accelerator. Amongst the many things that it helped us do, it really helped put to fruition moving beyond a classroom project and into something that can actually save patients' lives, into a company that is sustainable and has impact. What that means in practice is that we turned our idea, the breadboard that we had created, into an actual functional prototype. And that was through a lot of the services that Relevant Health provided. We wouldn't have been able to really code all of the algorithms. We wouldn't have been able to actually create the first prototype. And granted, it was large. That's part of hardware development. It was maybe the size of a credit card at that stage. And so it was just the first time that we were able to create something that was really functional that we could then go use in clinical trials and start our development work. So on the product side, it again turned into the first iteration of what neoGuard was. On the business side, I learned what a financial model was. I learned what it was, a crash course, a crash MBA course in just understanding what is business and how do we use our product and our roadmap to actually drive our business opportunity. And so that was the very first time that we were actually thinking more strategically about what does our company look like? Who are we actually going to sell to and what does this opportunity look like? Granted, it was so early because R&D takes quite a long time, but I think it really solidified the fundamentals of at some point in our journey, we're going to have to figure out all of these really hard pieces. And I think it's even harder in emerging markets where this isn't the primary method that hospitals get devices. They usually get them donated. So how do we really change and innovate on the business model side alongside our product development so those go hand in hand with us? So I think that the tangible assets that came out of the program were instrumental to our success. Beyond that, I think the mentors, the friends, the cohort that the accelerator provided, we wouldn't be here without all of that coaching and support. I know we'll talk about this later, but there's just such a power in community. And this was our very first community. This was the very first group that introduced us to what it takes to be a startup. And we were all going through challenges at the same time. And maybe they were different challenges, but we all could learn from each other and navigate them together. And so there was just so much collective highs and lows that we experienced throughout the accelerator program that I certainly cherish today.
Well, that was the first attempt BioHealth Innovation had at putting together an accelerator program, and you were in the first class. So the experiment has worked for you. We're glad to know that. And again, survival after 10 years, especially in the life sciences, medical device world, is very challenging. But you've now deployed over 350 devices across many African countries. Talk about the feedback you're getting on these devices that have been installed, and what's the clinician's reaction to it? What feedback have you received to make any modifications to the technology as you continue to progress?
The first thing, I'll just give you a high level of our journey over the past 10 years and what that looks like. So we spent the first 6-7 years in R&D on the product. We received CE mark on neoGuard, which is the European version of FDA clearance. We received that in 2021, and that led to our commercial launch first in Kenya. We spent the first year and a half of our commercial launch in product market fit, kind of that really heavy product market fit phase. And during that phase, honestly, it was really tough because we were on more patients, which one meant that we got more feedback that maybe we didn't see in clinical trials, or maybe it was exacerbated and things that didn't seem like an issue in clinical trials. And so we're very attentive to making sure that we're making those improvements before we're ready to scale. The initial feedback was very positive of the concept is great, the product is overall really good, but here's a list of things that needs to be fixed for this really to take adoption. And I think that's an important message for others that are trying to get in the medtech space is just medtech is really hard. The second you get FDA or CE mark doesn't mean that you're going to be in 100 hospitals. It means that you then need to select certain customers that can give you that real tangible feedback of commercial use of product because it will always be different than clinical use. So take that feedback, make improvements before you're ready to scale. And that's what we did. So we made improvements on the product. We iterated on our business model pretty significantly and switched in 2023 over to a direct sales model that essentially doubled our sales in the first quarter that we implemented this model. With that and a new version of the product, new iteration of the product, we really started to hit the ground running. So in 2023 up until now, that's when we've seen all of the devices deployed into 45 plus hospitals. And these are hospitals that we've created that demand from the bottom up. The facilities themselves that are requesting for these devices that are procuring from their own independent budgets because they know the need. And because of that, the feedback has been so positive. We're proud to have all of the clinical feedback and the countless stories about how our devices have helped improve efficiency, how they have changed the way that monitoring is happening in facilities, how patient outcomes are improved because of the vital signs. There's many stories like this, but one in particular where a nurse was telling me that it was a smaller ward. She had to deliver some paperwork to the administrator, and she was the only nurse in the ward. And so she left, all the babies were fine. And then she delivered the paperwork, but when she came back, our alarms were blaring for a particular patient. So she looked at our vitals, she looked at the trends, and the patient was desaturated. And so she immediately resuscitated the patient, delivered oxygen. But if she didn't have these alerts, if she didn't have vital signs monitoring, she may not have caught that. And so I think there are countless stories like that that just really tell us that we're not just creating something for the sake of creating a product. We're really creating something that is designed with and for our users. And the feedback that we've gotten is really proving that this is a product that is needed and worth scaling.
I would imagine you're getting feedback saying, we need this and we need that. Since you've been able to put this monitor together, what else can you do for us? So talk a little bit about your future direction. Is there new products that you're considering for sub-Saharan Africa or the emerging markets around the world?
That's a lot of the reason why it took us 7 years to get to market with our first product is because we created a quality management system that allows us to replicate our design and development process for future products. As I mentioned in the beginning, we've seen 100 problems walking into this ward. It's difficult to know where to start. Vital signs monitoring was the most obvious choice for us then, but there's still 99 other problems that we need to solve. And I think as engineers, we go into these wards and we automatically pick up on these things. Certainly, we are looking at future products and what that roadmap looks like for us. So the first expansion that we're looking at is expanding from neonatal to pediatric and adult patients. The beauty is we've created the products for the smallest patients, the smallest of the smallest patients. And so it's really easy for us to scale up from neonates to pediatric and adult patients. There's more usability considerations around placement, for example, but the product itself is relatively easy to scale up. That one creates bigger market opportunity for us, and two helps us impact many more patients. From there, we've also gotten demand to create a spot check version of our product that is more applicable in your outpatient departments or primary healthcare applications where care is still delivered in most of our African countries. This project is called NeoSpot. Instead of your centralized dashboard on a tablet, we've created a smartphone application that allows you to instantaneously collect the vital signs and view the vital signs. We can relay that back to a clinician. So think community health workers or remote patient monitoring, kind of the opportunities are endless there. in addition to adding additional vital signs that may be relevant for the markets that we're operating in. So that's the most immediate roadmap for us, is expanding the service offerings that we have with relatively minimal R&D investments. But beyond that, there is an incredible amount of data that we're collecting with our system that can really help guide the future of healthcare around the world. This data we're already using for internal purposes. We track every second our devices are on patients, which is good for utilization. It helps us understand our customers better. But just think about what the power of that data could be if we can aggregate and help hospitals understand how does their length of stay change based on a diagnosis. That's all information we're collecting with our system automatically. Just imagine what a large NGO or a government might be able to do if they can track the impact that they're having across all the facilities. So sort of for the first time, we're collecting data directly from the hospitals without having to do these really manual surveys. And there's just so much power that we have in that. So we're creating a platform called NeoCloud that allows us to aggregate data, not just from the neoGuard and NeoSpot systems, but every single future product we have to help inform what future needs might be in these communities.
Well, it sounds like you have a lot on your plate for the future, but focusing is also the challenge that people have to have in emerging companies, especially when you're trying to scale with your primary product. When you look at that scaling, what lessons have you learned related to balancing the cost, the quality, the regulatory requirements, and everything else, especially when you're dealing in the market that you're in, which is basically an emerging market, underserved market, has a regulatory environment that you have to deal with? What have you learned that might make it simpler the next time you go to market with another product?
I think there's a lot of things that we've learned, a lot of mistakes that we've made that hopefully we won't make again. But I think some of the lessons are just around the partnership development and really engaging the community. And so part of it is difficulty in getting that voice of customer, getting that feedback, getting that initial pilot going. We have all of those relationships. We've built the relationship with manufacturing and supply chain. All of those pieces are in place for us to be able to replicate it, and we don't have to start from scratch. Similarly, we're an ISO 1345 certified company. So we have our quality management system built with procedures that tell us exactly how to build new products. Of course, there's a tremendous amount of work that goes into building new products and identifying the problem to begin with, but we've got a playbook now. It's a lot easier than kind of fumbling around figuring out what works, doesn't work. We've built all of those relationships. I think when you think about scale, focus is exactly what we're looking at right now. We've got all of these ambitions. We want to be known as the medtech company for emerging markets. There's lots of excitement in this space, and it's sometimes easy to push the gas pedal on something that we're not ready for. We see startups do that time and again, but we are remaining really focused on getting to that product market fit and transitioning to scale in the markets that we're operating in right now. What that means for us is some of the, not cool things about getting our accounting systems set up, our inventory tracking systems, all of the things that have to happen in the background to really scale up from the 45 facilities to 500 to 5,000. There's a lot of pieces that need to be built, and that's exactly the phase that we're in right now. We learned many lessons around that, around how do you start with kind of manual processes, what systems do we need to invest in, where do we not need to invest in. But one thing we won't compromise on is the safety, quality, and efficacy of product. So we've gone the CE mark route because that's widely accepted in most of the markets that we operate in. So every African country, many of them have their own regulatory bodies, but if you have CE mark or FDA clearance, it sort of becomes a checkbox activity of submit the documentation so they can review and make sure that it's aligned. But since we've already designed for one of the most stringent regulatory authorities, it's usually sufficient for the local bodies as well. And that enables us to scale more rapidly, just having that partnership and designing with quality in mind from the beginning.
And scaling takes money. And you mentioned earlier you've raised $6 million over the course of the last 10 years. 3 of it's sort of in grants and 3 million of it is more equity oriented. Talk a little bit about first-time entrepreneur and the whole fundraising effort. And you never stop raising money as you're going through your entrepreneurial journey. So talk about the balance between non-dilutive funding and grants and equity funding, and what is the path you're taking forward to raise additional money to keep the momentum going for Neopenda?
I think our fundraising journey is a little bit atypical because of the markets that we're operating in and the type of company that we're building. So what I mean by atypical is that $6 million is half of it's dilutive, half is non-dilutive. So a lot of our early funding did come from non-dilutive sources, prizes, competitions. As students, we had many different opportunities available to us. And so it was nice to be able to get that funding from Cisco, Vodafone America's Foundation, Grand Challenges Canada. A lot of the kind of big players in this space gave us that vote of confidence and allowed us to do a lot of the R&D activities that investors may not be as interested in because it is risky at that stage. Until you really get to kind of that regulatory clearance, it is a challenge. There are, of course, healthcare VCs that can recognize opportunity up front. The challenge with many of the traditional healthcare VCs is they don't know emerging markets super well. They, of course, want to be value add, but if they don't know the markets, then there's a little bit of a disconnect. A lot of our early funding did come from those grants. Now we've transitioned into that profitable, scalable business model where we have that pathway to scale, that pathway to break even. So it does become a more attractive business opportunity from an investment side. That said, we continue to attract non-dilutive funding and grants and prizes because that funds a lot of our future R&D. That's typically how we split the capital. R&D is usually funded by non-dilutive grants and prizes. And then our investment dollars go to scaling what we know is proven. So expansion of neoGuard into new markets, for example, into hiring additional salespeople, that's all now well understood. So it makes it easier for us to use investment dollars to really just scale that growth and accelerate that growth. I think there are a number of challenges associated with fundraising in these environments, the market dynamics, the politics, so much more is involved in fundraising for the markets that we're operating in. But again, I think the ethos that we have at the company is if it were easy, it would have been done before, and these patients would already have access to the medical devices that they need. They don't. So we've got our work cut out for us. And, you hear 100 no's a day, and that's fine. We take all that feedback. We make improvements. Some of it we ignore because it doesn't make sense. But most of it, we're able to pour into making the company better and growing. And so it's nice to have both the grant capital that focuses on impact typically and the investment capital that focuses on profitability. Both of those are aligned with the mission of the company.
And I understand you have a round that you have open right now, and it's really on the equity side. Talk to the listeners about the round that you have that you're trying to raise now.
We've done similar things in the past, but we are now raising a community round on WeFunder. So what that really means is that all of you have the power to invest for as little as $100 into a company that is doing well while doing good. There is just such a tremendous amount of respect that I have for the community. And this is not just about fundraising. This is not just about attracting dollars. It's also about gathering all of your collective expertise that can really take us to scale from where we are today to impacting thousands, millions of patients around the world. So I think there is just a tremendous power in the community. So we don't need to leave it into the hands of traditional VCs or angel investors that are only able to write bigger check sizes. Everybody has the power to do something. And if you're interested in investing in a company, I'd encourage you to check out our WeFunder page. And we're really excited with the early momentum that we've created on the campaign and looking forward to seeing more of you on it.
How do they find that page?
You can go to wefunder.com/neopenda. You can also go to our website, neopenda.com, and we link to that there. And follow us on socials. We're active on LinkedIn. So there's many different ways that you can get involved. But if you're truly interested in learning more, you can also feel free to contact me directly at sona@neopenda.com.
Now, you talked about the power of community, and we're going to close with your talking a little bit about this journey you've been on with entrepreneurship. What keeps you motivated doing what you're doing every day right now? And what do you see as the next 3 to 5 years looking for Sona Shah at this point?
There's lots of different ways that we can look at that. But what excites me most is the next journey that we're entering into. What we've created at Neopenda is not just about the first product. It's not about the suite of products that we'll create. It's about the movement that we are helping shape in African countries to show that there is a way for us to actually create products with and for users that is sustainable in these markets. there is a way to combine impact with profitability and not have to compromise on either of those. There is a way that medtech should be thought of as a global product and not just for the 15%. What I'm most excited about is not just the products we're creating. I'm thrilled with the traction we're seeing, the impact that we're having, the profitability story that we do have. But I'm also really excited that we're early shakers and movers in the space of medtech and emerging markets. And it's been nice to see that movement has started gaining momentum across the continent. And we're really proud to be part of that. So the next 3 to 5 years, what we're looking at is building on a lot of that momentum, hitting the pavement and getting out to more patients, more facilities, more countries that need the products that we've created and that are going to create, but also encouraging other people to join us in this journey, whether it's directly investing in the company and being right alongside us or starting your own company. There are more than enough problems that none of us will be stepping on each other's toes for a long time. And there's a lot of lessons that I think we can learn from each other. So I hope that there are more and more of us that are working in these spaces in years to come.
Well, we've been talking with Sona Shah, who's the CEO and co-founder of Neopenda, and has survived 10 years in a very tough emerging market. Not that the market today is any easier than what you've already gone through, Sona. So we know that you have the persistence and the patience to make this work long-term, though. So I congratulate you on your ability to really look at a social mission and build it into a potentially profitable venture for investors as well. So you've been able to combine what your passion is to help the global society improve the quality of health throughout the world, but at the same time, create a venture that has the ability to generate financial returns for those who believe in it. We will gladly follow up with you as you continue to make progress on your journey. So Sona, congratulations on where you are today. And for those interested, you can find out more about Neopenda at their website and also this new community round that they are raising. And if you want to talk to Sona again, it's sona@neopenda.com. Correct, Sona?
That's correct.
Thank you, Sona, for being on BioTalk today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to BioTalk with Rich Bendis.